purification. That's the topic for today. In all spiritual traditions, like Christianity, mystical Christianity, Zen, Buddhism, non-duality, Sufism, Islam, there's always this concept or these teachings on the need of purification, part of the spiritual work, part of the awakening work, part of spiritual practice, sadhana, however we call it. It involves purification. The whole work, in some way, a large part of it is purification. And they talk in terms, the various religious traditions or spiritual traditions, they talk in terms of purifying the mind from evil thoughts, or purifying the heart, and then guarding the mind, watchfulness from evil thoughts, or guarding the heart, or polishing the mirror, or cleaning something up in some way, the impurities. I realized that in the context of this archetypal process of purification, the traditions, they bring other metaphors like fire. There needs to be fire usually for purification. There needs to be heat. There needs to be friction. There needs to be, it's not just a mellow, relaxed, comfortable purification. This is connected to some uncomfortable process that is very good for consciousness or for oneself. Yeah, what is your understanding on this, and what is being purified? And what is the impurity actually? What is that really? What is being, we are purified from what? And who is doing that? And what are the essential ingredients for this process to take place? And what stops it or blocks it? Well, just
yes, and why is it necessary?
Yeah.
What's the result if purification happens? And we haven't even yet talked about what that is, what that means, but if there's purification and it's, let's say, successful, then what's the result? Is there a result, or is that a preparatory step in relation to spirituality, in relation to awakening, in relation to enlightenment, in relation to consciousness, awareness? What is this? This is all very worth exploring, because it can be assumed. It's also often, purification is often associated with renunciation, giving up something, sacrificing, fasting, all these things. That we need to give up things, we need to then become purified. Why? For what? How? Etc. What's the next step, if there's a next step after purification? Is there a next step? And what is it? And how to take it, and how to take it consciously. There are many questions here, in certain respects more questions than answers, certainly from the perspective of the mind. But it's good for us to talk about it, I'm sure, because so much, it's sort of glossed over, it's taken for granted, it's assumed, oh yes, purification, I need to be purified. I need to renounce my temptations, I need to renounce my indulgences, I need to, all of this. But to understand why, to do it consciously, is very different.
These days, I don't think that spiritual people think so much of this purification, because it's a different, these are like come from a ancient tradition connected with religious ritual, but these days culture is very different, and there might not be even no thoughts or in looking into this purification. There may be some misunderstanding that there's no need of purification. You are just perfect, just the way you are. There's nothing need to be done, and you just need to realize something, and it's groovy and effortless and easy and no problem. Then I realized, hey, this is very esoteric information. Now everybody clicks a button and finds out this esoteric information. But in the past, the master wouldn't just get some Joe Blow from the street and tell him esoteric information. There will be a long process of actual testing and purification before they receive such high teaching.
Yes, which implies there's a step before purification. There's preparation for purification. And then purification itself is preparation for something else, which in fourth way terminology, I would call transformation. You don't just turn right directly to purification. I shouldn't put it as a statement, I should put it as a question. Is there something that is necessary prior to purification? How do you prepare yourself for that so that it goes right, so that it achieves its supposed goal relative to spiritual evolution, conscious growth, conscious awakening, and so on?
Yeah, if we take the metaphor, let's say cleaning up a cluttered basement where it's dark, and there are creatures and skeletons, and we say, hey, Joe, why don't you go and purify your basement? But Joe doesn't even know that there is a basement and that there's no light in the basement. So no purification can be done in a pitch black, dark, or in the fourth way they say no work can be done in sleep.
And also cleansing is not necessarily purification. This is also worth thinking about. For example, if you have water and there are impurities in the water, or you have the air and there are pollutants in the air, and you go about cleaning them, that means you're now trying to remove those impurities, those toxins, those pollutants. All right, let's suppose you succeed and you remove them. In other words, you clean the air or you clean the water. What you're left with is simply clean air and clean water. That air and that water have not been transformed in any way. They're just now clean. So what does that mean? What then would purification mean in this regard as compared to or contrasted with just cleansing? This is all worth looking at closely, carefully, with as much clarity of awareness as possible. This is no small thing, this idea of purification in relation to the self-realization of conscious awareness. And then this raises other questions. For example, is it that our awareness needs to be purified? Is it somehow polluted? Is it somehow tainted? Is it somehow toxic and poison? Does it need to be purified? Or is it perhaps our body and mind that are in need of purification so that they can serve as instruments for more conscious awareness? Or is the body and mind as the person being purified in some way, and is that enough? Is that our goal, to become purified as a person? Like you mentioned earlier, evil thoughts or salacious thoughts, desires, temptations, evil wanderings of the mind, and so on. Again, what is purification? What does it refer to? We did a talk recently, Mihai, about different levels of man, and this idea that you can understand the word God, the word love, the word self, all on very different levels. To think about it is that purification is akin also to the process of distillation. Just as whiskey is distilled and other things, they get distilled. For example, wine, there's a fermentation process and a distillation. There's a cleansing, there's a purification that goes on. Winemaking, this distillation is not just one version of it, continues to happen. And there's more and more a distillation. And we can think of it in terms of our interest, which is awakening, which is consciousness, is that consciousness itself, awareness, distills itself gets distilled more and more, and it extracts itself out of the body and out of the mind, and it draws itself into itself more and more clearly, more and more purely. As it extracts itself more and more out of a sense of identity, and then more and more into a realization of being, and then even beyond that into sort of let's call it an isness, a pure unadulterated presence with less and less and less and less identification as a characteristic of it. Using the fourth way terminology of the different levels of man, that men number 1, 2, and 3, there needs to be a purification. The heavier matter gets dissolved and it releases the lighter matter. This is alchemy. This is the magic, mystical idea of alchemy. And this is awareness extracting itself from form. More and more extracting itself from form. And so men number 1, 2, and 3 they are entrenched, their consciousness is entrenched in the feeling of being the person, the feeling of I. And there has to be a kind of purification, a process. You mentioned heat earlier, friction, suffering, and realizations that in themselves can be painful, that bring about the beginning of a dissolution of the feeling of I, of being the person. And then men number 4, women number 4, still operate with some sense of I. And that also has to be, awareness has to be distilled out of that, extracted out of that. So that's a different level of purification. Now you know, yes, I have this false personality. I have this idea of myself as a person. And I know there's something more in my being. I want to be more true to that. But I can't find a way. I can't seem to be able to do it. So now there has to be things that happen that bring about this purification, the kind of suffering. And then even beyond that, I think you can say a man number 5 is still being purified. There's still a distillation happening to extract, for consciousness to extract itself from these last vestiges of a sense of I, albeit from a more conscious perspective. The last vestiges of a sense of I into yet a higher dimension of less identity, less a feeling of identity, meaning less identification. That's less attachment of consciousness to the mind and to the body and to the sense of I in the mind and in the body.
It's a separate, whenever Peter talks like of a sense of I, is referring to a sense of being a separate me, separate, autonomous, limited. That's what we mean about what in non-duality is called the separate self. That's what we are talking about here.
An example that came to my mind, of course, from the Gospels is Christ in the temple with the money changers. And because I was thinking, what needs to be purified? And the need for purification is there due to the fact of corruption. And by the way, Rodney Collin, the protege of Peter Ouspensky, he took this idea of he developed this idea of the 6 processes, that there are only 6 possible triads, 6 combinations of triads. And there are several of them that relate to what we're talking about. One is this idea of corruption. There is a process of corruption that happens. And it's interesting to examine, what does this mean psychologically to a human being? So, for example, consciousness becoming identified, the whole process of identification is really a form of corruption that's happening to consciousness itself. consciousness, the more it descends into heavier matter, let's say into heavier form, it becomes corrupted. It's really another word for saying this rarefied matter of awareness is now solidifying in form, and then in deeper form and deeper form. And then there's this corruption, and it goes into this feeling of I. And then in the fourth way, one of the best examples of this is, of course, negative emotions. Negative emotions are a form of psychological corruption that are not necessary, but which happen inevitably due to identification. And so you could say that all the work, the entire arena of work surrounding negative emotions in the fourth way is work on purification. This corruption is followed by a period of destruction. And the destruction is then followed by a period of healing. And the healing sets the stage potentially for regeneration, which is akin to transformation and transmutation. And I say potentially on purpose because all of us can go through periods of corruption and then destruction where things get broken apart. So it's sort of destruction is necessary for the healing to happen. Now there can be healing, and we can go in our life through all of these three stages I just mentioned without experiencing any kind of transformation of consciousness, of awareness, of awakening. And many people do go through difficult trials, and they go through these processes, and there is a healing. There is, but what happens is it remains on the level of the person. And what we're talking about here, and the reason we're having this conversation, is related to consciousness, awareness, the awakening, the self-realization of awareness. What does purification have to do with this? Why is it necessary? Why is it part? Why does the caterpillar have to be broken apart? You could even say it goes through this volatile process of destruction so as to be reconstituted as a butterfly. And that's also a classic example, metamorphosis, representing destruction, purification.
Or my best understanding is that what is impure, and these are words and metaphors from one angle, it's the imagined separate self, or ego, or the feeling of me as a separate. That is the impurity. We know that this separate self or ego is not a something, it is an activity of consciousness. So it's an activity where the consciousness doesn't know itself somehow and is contracted and deluded and is sucked into something which is a lie. Purification would be for this activity of consciousness to be less and less caught in this activity of creating the separate self. When I heard for the first time this idea of a separate self, believing to be separate, I didn't even know what it means, because it was so deep, this feeling separate. My whole self-remembering, my whole spiritual work was done from being a person. Know it. Before we can purify, we need to know that there's impurities there. The beginner's purification will be to take the most dense stuff, like self-hatred, or self-judgment, or self-pity, or judging others, or stuff like that, which is obvious. It's a heavier expression of the egoing state. So we start with clear, pinpointed things like the negative emotions, the reactivity, the I'm not good enough, the self-deprecation. I see it as if this State of sleep is like you have this pristine cloth, divine mystical cloth, that accumulated stain after stain after stain to the point that it become crusty. And so this purification is kind of gradual. So first we remove the crustiest, dirtiest stains. And only when the cloth is already received a lot of war cycles, the cloth is now less crusty with dirt, the cloth now is more clean, now we can perhaps tackle the feeling of I.
In the fourth way, we can say that really the whole gamut of what's called unnecessary suffering and giving up, renouncing. This is real renunciation, true renunciation, internal renunciation. To sacrifice, to give up one's unnecessary suffering is really a form of purification. When it then comes to real suffering and the transforming of real suffering, now we're talking about transformation, transmutation. And you can see in this example, transmutation is not even possible until purification is more or less complete. Because otherwise you're going to respond to, react to, deflect your real suffering with all your negativity, your negative attitude, your imagination, your fear, your lying, your unnecessary talk. You're not going to be able to manage real suffering until you can see your way through, navigate your way all the way through your unnecessary suffering. And many times, things like meditation, yoga, and prayer, they are often presumed to be some kind of attempt at transformation, when in fact, they are really vehicles for purification. And they are the body and the mind often trying to purify themselves, to become a cleaner, more simple vessel for awareness. Now, can something like yoga, meditation, or prayer also be a vehicle for transformation? Yes. But here again, we come to this idea, the same thing, the same word, the same seeming practice can serve different purposes for different people at different times.
But I think more often than not, these three things, like what you described, that will be a good case scenario. But prayer and meditation and yoga, I think they are a vehicle for something much more diluted. They are now thrown in the everyday parlance in people's unconsciousness. So they are sacred practices are used as a remedial activity to not feel so bad temporarily. It's a little bit like a shot of whiskey. I'm going to do a little yoga, or I'm going to meditate, watch my breath, or pray a little bit. But why? Not because I'm interested in the truth or what I am, or no, because I feel bad, and I learned that if I do this a little bit, I feel a little bit better. Also with the prayer, it's some kind of trade with God and negotiating and all kind of, basically can be, these three things can be a vehicle for delusion, deeper into ignorance. These practices can be used and are used, I would say, majority of the time for having a spiritual sleep, a sleep with spiritual dreams. Yeah, more hopeful dreaming.
And also, there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. Again, it goes back to level of being, the person. In a way, you can see that meditation, yoga, prayer, the way they're being used now, we're living in a time of a lot of tension for a lot of people, and these things do ease tension. They do lower blood pressure. They do calm the psychological waters, and so on. And this is useful. And this serves, you could even say, a form of healing. At the same time, the same practice used more consciously with a different understanding and a different intention can yield quite a different result. The vehicle is the same, but the manner in which it's used is different. And so everyone can ask themselves, why am I doing yoga? Why do I meditate? Why do I pray? What is my intended result? Why is this necessary? Where is it leading me? Is it preparation for something else? Is it a doorway to something else? And it can be. And there's not just one doorway. You go through one and then you can see there's another one to go through and another one to go through.
Yeah, this reminds me that this is a path of understanding, not intellectual understanding, but real understanding. And Uspensky, I believe, was saying that it's really important when you make any effort on this path to the more you have understanding about why you do this effort, the more results you're going to have. So the more we understand why we meditate or pray, more results there would be.
Another idea in the fourth way that I find helpful, related to this idea of purification, and as purification relates to transformation, is the idea of essence. That you could say, because from one point of view, we could say that consciousness, awareness itself is never tainted, is never rendered impure, is never poisoned or polluted, or in a certain way in its rarest form it can't be, because it's in a different dimension. And so it can't be. Nevertheless, on the level of human being, consciousness is in this, what's often called a seed case of essence. Essence is the potential. Essence is awareness rendered in a certain kind of form, really molecular form, due to identification. It is awareness unaware of itself. This is quite interesting. It's awareness unaware of itself. That is really the highest form of essence. And then it manifests itself, though, in the mind and body. And it's in the mind and body when it starts, it's like it enters these filters, like caverns and tunnels of the mind and body. And this is where impurity starts to happen. And now this essence, where we as a human are a very simple person, we become a persona. And this idea in the fourth way, chief feature, turns into this full-blown feeling of I, of identity, that we must protect and defend and project and so on. And it's really the cause of all of our psychological problems in our life. It's what experiences all of those problems. It's at the center of all of those problems. This chief feature, this deep-rooted feeling of I, which is the result of identification. So the way I see it is there needs to be a purification to restore essence. It's about the restoration of essence first. Essence has to return to its sort of normal, clean, simple, honest condition of just simple being. And from there can be a transformation, which is really a return of the purity of awareness to itself. And so again, this idea of extraction, distillation. And many of the ideas in the fourth way are about this. They're about how to restore essence. This idea of not expressing negative emotions, of trying not to be in imagination, trying not to be identified, not lying, talking, trying not to consider. All of these things really can be seen as methods for restoring essence to its natural state, to its sort of re-gearing it back so that it performs according to its potential. And its real true potential is as this seed case for awareness to realize itself. Another idea sort of parallel to this that I thought about is in the Bible, the idea of the Garden of Eden. You could say that the Garden of Eden is really a representation of essence. And what is this Garden of Eden internally relative to spirituality? It is sort of a framework of the human being in pure form as essence. And now the wind, you could say the wind of consciousness, can blow through this garden. And when it's pure and it's simple and it's clean and it's unadorned with anything artificial, this wind, which did not realize itself. Think about the wind. The wind, you never see the wind. It's invisible. You see its effect on objects, but you never see the wind. This wind drifts through the Garden of Eden, through essence, consciousness passing through this vessel in such a way that as it passes through this Garden of Eden, it can realize itself. The wind, for a period, takes the form of this garden. It takes form in the garden by virtue of flowing through the hedges and lawns and whatnot. It takes a certain form in such a way that the awareness can realize itself. The wind can know itself as the wind. It didn't know it was the wind. But if this garden is overgrown and it's filled with stuff and there's lots of weeds and it's not been manicured, it's not been maintained, it's overgrown, the wind can't even get through. The wind can't, it's blocked. And that's another thing about purification, is it implies this removal of blockages. What's blocking awareness from realizing itself right now? More clearly, more simply, more vividly. What's in the way? And the fourth way points to these very specific areas that we've mentioned a few times: identification, imagination, getting lost again and again in the train of thought, being pulled downstream by thoughts, by a subject, by a worry, by a concern, by an anticipation, a regret. And then this worry about what other people think about us. And these are all examples of these blockages. This is awareness being blocked. And so the Garden of Eden, the temptation, that's where it happened, right? I mean, that's the analogy. That's this idea that there was this temptation. And it was really the temptation of consciousness to identify with and attach itself to the body and mind in the form of a feeling of identity.
Then they looked at themselves, Adam and Eve. This is esoteric, yeah? And they realized they're naked and they felt bad about it. They felt shame. Now everything was fine. And suddenly they see the same thing. And there's a problem. There's something wrong. There's something bad. So then I need to hide. I need to hide. And I need to lie to myself, to others. And then one is banished. We talked in the earlier talks about essence and personality. So that's a very much recommended talk. And yeah, what Peter is saying here is that when we meet the work, especially in the West, in the Western world, we are already in this more like false realm that is complicated, heavy, full of inner contradictions, psychic, emotional, energetic realm of complicated, mental, inauthentic worries, problems, stress, and like it's not relaxed. It's not like a child. There's no innocence there. Yeah, so that's we start meeting the work from false personality. And so what Peter is saying and what the system is saying through learning this, studying the teachings, and then learning about self-observation and self-remembering and non-identification, we are bringing awareness to this false construct, which is painful. And in this process, this diminishes, this diminishes. And the aim is to return to, children are in essence up to a certain age, and that's why we love them. They don't have worries, they don't have inner considering, they are like alive and free and spontaneous, and it's a different fragrance But as Peter said, they are not aware of themselves. They are just natural, spontaneous, free. Before they are shocked and hurt, then they, but free, but unaware of themselves. They are lost in fascination. So we are trying to come back to that state, but not be forgetting everything. So we have the teaching and we have the practices, and we reverse engineered our falseness. So we are in a place that we are back more into some innocence, naturalness, less complicated, less dilemma. It's very clear what I like, what I don't like, what's true, what false. Like good ego psychotherapy, at best, will bring people to more essence. They are less false, they are more inner authentic. But what we are trying to do, to come back to essence, and essence wakes up. So it's more just my natural. It's not just my unique configuration of Mihai. It's more like out of this unique configuration of Mihai, presence wakes up to itself, right?
It's very interesting. I mean, it's hard to describe, and I'm kind of interested in hearing you describe it, because we say we want to return to this. It's as though we are something. We want to return to this place. But it's not quite like that. This awareness is always in its seat and doesn't know it. And when it gets drawn out of itself, out of its seat, let's call it, gets drawn out of its seat, not all of it leaves the seat. It just remains unaware of itself, and then it gets drawn out and it's pulled out by thoughts, emotions, sensations, desires, people, events, the future, the past. All of this conceptual, as I've said before, each thought is like a little dream. The more vividly you see thoughts, you will see this more clearly. A thought is like a dream. Each thought, even as we're speaking, we have to be careful that we don't fall into these little dreams as we're saying them and fall out of our seat. And even the idea of the Buddha sitting, meditating, personifies this idea of awareness remaining in its seat. It's often called sitting meditation. So this awareness is getting drawn up, but it's not as though now, it's not like we're out there and we have to go back to where awareness is in its seat. No, it's all about awareness. It's all about consciousness. Simply returning to its seat, even though it doesn't leave its seat, it returns to its seat by realizing itself. And that's this thing about essence. Essence is this seed, this extract of consciousness. And it realizes itself, and that's what happens. And when you look at small children, that's what you see. You see them, and they're there, and they're looking, and you look more carefully, and you see behind their eyes, what's there looking out does not know itself in most cases. And if you're there, if you're present and you look at a child without, of course, staring at them, or you just notice them, that they will sometimes notice you noticing them, and they'll like, oh, the awareness in them, yeah, it knows something, it recognizes something, but it doesn't know itself as this pure awareness. This too, for us, we think we're these people sitting here having a conversation, talking or listening or whatnot. But this awareness is not this. This is just the container. And this awareness can begin to know that more and more clearly, that it is not the container. It's looking through the windows of the container. It's listening through the portholes of the container. And it is not a physical thing. And it's not a psychological thing either. It is this purity, and that's where purification leads. Purification, from one point of view, is all about consciousness. On the other hand, it's about the body and mind being purified as a vessel, such that the consciousness in the vessel can realize itself without hindrance, without obstacle, without blockage.
Actually, when I came as a ego, false personality with a magnetic center, interested in something higher. I wasn't interested in innocence, to come back to innocence. My false personality was not interested in coming back to innocence. No, I was interested in enlightenment, man. And so it'd be like a switch in it was mixed. My honest search and application was mixed. There's the honest, noble interest in the truth, mixed with my ego wanting to be super special. And enlightenment was the promise of being now the ultimate super special, thing. So, but my point here is that no matter what kind of thoughts we have about the path, what seems to happen is that if we engage on the path in a good way, no matter what we think, there will be this process of our false personality will diminish. So false personality will be purified out of us. There will be less of it, and we are going to, essence will be no more there. And then, it seems like purifying false personality, and then essence is being distilled or transmuted and out of it. As you're talking, I just had this flashback. I was about maybe 10 years old, and I was playing tennis every day already for 4 years. I go to the club, I play tennis with training. I was training. I even know a clear, vivid memory of what court somewhere in Romania. And something happened, nothing shocking happened, nothing. But as I was playing tennis, something happened in my consciousness of 10-year-old boy that I was aware. I don't know. I think it's almost like the higher centers jump-started themselves, or like an engine. So basically, it was very weird for me, because I was playing tennis. I didn't have like Ramana, fear of death, or I'm like, see the truth of God. No, I was playing tennis, but something was like, in which I was aware of being. And that was very strange. I remember that as a kid, I was like, well, it was something strange. And it lasted for a few hours, and I kept playing tennis and all of that, but there was this, I was aware of being, not knowing anything about the teaching and not knowing anything. I was aware of being. I mean, the being was aware, was temporarily activated itself in this life. Which, it's interesting, it created memory. I don't remember anything from that year, very likely, unless I got into major trouble. But I remember that. Those times.
What's interesting too is that we have these moments, but why can't they last? Why doesn't that awareness remain in focus like that? And especially enough and in such a way that it can realize itself more clearly. And this is why purification is needed. It's very peculiar. Awareness arrives, consciousness arrives in this human form, in this existence, what we call a human body, human life. And it arrives in the container, in the temple, with virtually no understanding or realization about itself. This is fascinating. And yet it can come to know itself, this true self-knowledge, true self-realization. But all of these things start to form in us, these blockages. And this does bring us to it requires that we come to a complete completely different relationship to the whole idea of suffering and pressure and heat and friction in our lives. That this heat, this friction, this what's called suffering, human suffering, it has a bad name, of course, but that's what I mean about turning our thinking about it all around. This heat is really, on the one hand, it's the conscious engine of creation. It's the fuel of this engine, but it's also the fuel of what the fourth way calls the mechanical engine of creation, and it drives people usually into identification. Their awareness is driven into, forced into, pushed into, packaged into identification, into deeper form, for reasons we don't fully understand about how the universe works, what this solar system is about, and why it is what it is, and there's an earth, and we're humans, and there are animals, and it goes on and on. There's a lot we don't know. But at the same time, this very heat, this pressure of being a human, can be the catalyst for this self-realization, back to these moments, exactly these kind of moments Mihai was describing. Because what Mihai was describing is exactly what happens when this consciousness begins to wake up more and more often. And it's as though this awareness begins to fill the space more and more. There it is, this spaciousness of awareness comes alive in you. It realizes itself. But initially, just as Mihai was saying when he was 10 years old, this awareness didn't really understand what was going on, and it had an effect on the mind. It left a trace in the mind in the form of a memory. See, and then the mind attaches to the memory and thinks that's special, the particular place and the event, and that's not what was special. What was special was this awareness knew itself in that moment, or for those moments, or for those few hours. That's what's special. Just like people talk about their story of awakening. The story of awakening isn't really special. No one's, not anyone's. And it's that the awareness recognized itself, realized itself, became aware, returned to its seat, and knew itself. And the unknown started becoming the known. In a way, you could say that's what awakening is. More and more, it's the unknown becoming the known, more and more and more, and then more unknown becoming the known. It has to become practical for a person. What is purification? Why do I need it? How do I approach this? How can I approach this more intentionally, more purposefully, more consciously in my life? How can I be more true, more simple? Not simple like simple-minded, but less false, less adorned, more pure as a person, for the purpose of being sort of a clean vessel, such that these moments, the exact kind of moments that Mihai was describing, will happen spontaneously, organically on their own. Because if we are purified, that will happen. And the more we understand it, when it does happen, it'll become more intelligent, more recognizable to itself.
Yeah, actually, as you were talking, some minutes ago, you were talking really deep stuff, and I went in imagination about something unrelated. And then I think about this guy, and Peter was talking here. And then I was like, whoa.
You'll have to go back to the video and watch it to see what...
And then I became aware that I was dreaming, and then I was back. But I remember that years ago, my whole day was like that. Even when I knew about this daydreaming and imagination, and I was trying very hard to not be in imagination and harness attention and bring myself from being sucked into the dreaming that was fueled by a lot of stuff, desires and fears and whatever. It's fueled by a lot of stuff. And although I knew about this, I was making active effort. I couldn't do it for much. And as soon as I would be present, I would be hooked again for years. Yeah, now it's not like that. And now, yeah, it came, I became aware of it, it went away. So I think there was a lot of purification happen in the last 15 years or so, to the point that it's not like that. And that's why, you know, for the people in my group, they were saying, hey man, this thing with the purifying the sense of me, activity of consciousness, I think is way above my head. I was like, yes, because there's all the time imagination, inner considering, not enough attention. So practically at the beginning, we are in total delusion, ignorant, tricking ourselves. And that's why Ouspensky was saying at the beginning, or Gurdjieff, the currency is attention. That's what you have. You have some attention. And it comes down to what do you do with this attention? So training this attention. Because without this attention to sustain itself more and then divide attention, or no purification is happening, nothing. You are lost in illusion.
In the fourth way, the practical handles for this are, of course, this idea of being present. Just noticing where you are and what's around you, and realizing that you're noticing them, and the realizing that you know you're here, this presence. This is the inroads to purification. And it's so clear to me that the most toxic aspect of human nature is negative emotions. This is corruption of a high level in psychological form that manifests through the negative side of the ego. And trying your best when you feel this rise of negativity to not express it with the understanding of why. You're not giving your energy, your best energy, to those impulses. Not to be a better person, not to be a nice person, but understanding that that is corrupting your being. Your awareness is temporarily being stolen from you. And this also is a big area in terms of this idea of purification. And another key one, of course, is this idea of imagination, not drifting into the stream of thought for so long, not getting pulled under and going on and on and on, to come back to realize, okay, I'm here, this is my life, this moment right now, whatever's happening. And understanding imagination is exactly that, imagination. It's a dream. This is purifying the mind, just as this work on negative emotions is purifying the emotions. And these are vital. These are the two backbones, really, of preparation for something else.
Something that is a big source of suffering, and which is unnecessary self-created suffering, and it's an impurity of the mind, is having lots of thoughts about me. Basically, me as a person. And that me is like me as when I see me, and having thoughts about me, I've done that, I shouldn't have done that, or they think of me, that me is a story of me, where I see myself as the body and the chronology. So that's important, you know, to make it practical. This is sleep, basically. So, you know, since you are present and quiet, I'm going to throw another idea. We started to talk last time, and we interrupted. We started to talk about love, and then out of the conversation, it came like that true love and this being loving, that's actually more like a property of true love, and all of this gratitude and awe and reverence and being touched by beauty, and these start to happen as we are more awake. This is more like the higher emotional center. So having a different, after the emotional center has been more cleaned up from reactivity, negative emotion, hatred, impatience, feature, now, and for more awakefulness, the heart, so to say, is at another level. And it's not necessarily useful to try to be more loving and stuff like that, yeah? But what I want to say is that for me, and talking now about purification of the heart, yeah, how I understand purification of the heart, besides the work, non-expression of negative emotions and judgment and all of this that we talked so far, besides that, for me it was very instrumental and useful and beneficial when I encountered this teaching from David Hawkins. And it was also, I could feel the transmission of his heart and wakefulness. But he was saying this, a very powerful practice is to cultivate loving kindness, benevolence, lovingness towards all life, including yourself. And the beetles and the cockroaches or the people, to cultivate an attitude of lovingness towards all life, including oneself, no matter what. And he would say things like, hey, this is not an emotion, this is an attitudinal asana, stance towards life. Cultivate this the best you can, and anything that comes in the way of that, you need to investigate it, because there's some kind of false self operating. Yeah. And for me, I wasn't having recognition that I was still Mihai, trying to remember myself when I encountered these teachings. I wasn't being aware of being the presence. But somehow the teaching was very touching, impactful, and I tried to do that. I was trying to do that, and it was helpful. So, although I could see that, yeah, I was doing it from the second state, or I was doing it from being asleep and all of that, but it's kind of fake it till you make it in a way. I think there's this idea in the system too, that all of these practices are almost trying to force yourself to be how you would be if you were awake. So this teaching from David Hawkins, it's like while being asleep, I was trying to make my emotional function operate in a way as if I were awake, because if you were awake, this is more natural. You see that everything is the same reality, and everything is me, everything is God, and there's a natural loving kindness, benevolence, which doesn't preclude that you can tell someone to shut up and go away. Yeah. David Hawkins was saying that this doesn't mean that you are taking garbage and you are abused. So you can be loving and benevolent, and if the abusive husband keeps coming, you say, Jack, that's not okay. If you don't go, I'm going to call the cops. That is lovingness. Yeah. So I want to throw this in the pot, because I would say that's a skillful and direct aspect of purifying the heart from egoic tendencies and selfishness and me and using others and resentments, and that's a good compass, you know.
These are the centers, these are the heart and mind aligning themselves, trying purposely to align themselves with awareness and with what they understand to be the kind of perceptivity that's characteristic of awareness. So yes, trying to be more loving, trying to be more kind, trying to be more gentle, considerate of the beetles, etc. It is a kind of a imitation on the level of the mind and body, and that's good, that's healthy. However, it needs to be understood that that's what all it is. It is not awareness. And this other thing that happens when awareness is more conscious, more self-realized, is that it's seeing so clearly has an effect now on the heart and on the mind, on the intellectual center and on the emotional center. And now when this awareness is conscious and is seeing, it reverberates, you could say, in the emotional center. And now there's this emotion of what could be called love, affection, fondness, deeper forms of it, not the ordinary kind. But we do have this emotional capacity to expand quite a bit, but it's done mostly in response to more light, more consciousness. The same with the mind. Our mind has remarkable capacity of a certain kind that is not necessarily just being exercised every day in the business world or the science world or whatever, the mathematical world. No, to think in quite a different, on a higher level, more clearly about things, but it's due to light pouring into the intellectual center from consciousness. So, but this, and also what you were saying, Mihai, to my understanding, that's not purification. I mean, that's just trying to kind of order the mind and order the heart, meaning put them in order, in such an order that they would be if they were purified. And that is helpful. It's like exercising a certain kind of muscle. And I can recall reading Gene Klein. I liked very much the first time I read it, this idea of, he called it affectionate awareness. And this resounded with me, and this can apply to any of our centers. The hand can have an affectionate awareness for I'm just touching this little piece of felt on the microphone. The hand can have an affectionate awareness. It's really awareness having affectionate awareness through the hand, through sensation. And then the same affectionate awareness for a person or for a moth in the room that you escort out of the room rather than just smash it against the window. An affectionate awareness for life, for creation. And so on. Affectionate awareness for an idea, a profound concept. And it's kind of that same thing. And yet, this is kind of reverse osmosis, trying to work from the bottom up. And that's good. But what we're also talking about, it works when it comes from the top down. It's effortless. It's a natural process of, now the temple is purified, let's say, and it responds. It's now in a position to respond to presence, to awareness. Coming into the temple and filling it with light, and now the temple, the garden, can respond. And normally we're not responding to our own consciousness. Consciousness is so identified most of the time, we're just responding to stuff, things happening, the weather. Somebody looks at us a certain way or says something, or we're hungry, or it's cold, or whatever. And we're just reacting. We're reacting, really. We're not even responding. We're reacting. This other thing is sort of, to use a popular word now, being proactive. It would be being proactive to have a loving intention in these different areas.
Yeah, so what example I gave when I encountered this heart teaching was that was some purification that was happening prior to recognition of presence. And now one of my teachers, Francis, which is like representative of non-duality direct path, he was talking about this post-awakening sadhana, post-awakening spiritual practice, which is interesting. Basically, once I understood, not just intellectual, but once one understands or sees that the presence is the identity, if there has to be an identity, the presence is the identity, and this presence is not personal and limited, it is universal. Yeah, so that would be what is called non-duality, a liberating glimpse. However, one can have that, and for most people that is not, it's not, it will be forgotten, we'll forget or something. Why? Because for many decades and maybe many a lifetime, my machine, body-mind, is used to operating with under the setting of believing to be separate. So his post-awakening sadhana recommendation was to, okay, now that I see a glimpse of the truth, now try to live according to the truth. Meaning, align how I deal with people, how I deal with this body, how I do business, how I talk to people, how I deal with everything from this understanding that there is only one, there's only God, basically. Yeah, so I am aligning my all set, I'm trying to realign my operating system with the recognition of truth.
Yes, this is like a higher degree of purification, where you're purposely going about purifying your being.
Yeah.
This is beautiful.
Because then he was saying like, okay, I'm here in the satsang and everything is God and all that. And then I'm going and doing business and I'm nasty and I'm tricking people. That's not aligned with that. So you can't talk from both sides of the mouth. I mean, one can, but have the recognition of presence in the satsang. And here I'm operating from sense of separation and ego, selfishness. And then that will block. I'll have something and they will give feedback from God, the universe.
And as long as those things are not done from the perspective of a persona, now you're back in identity, you're back in it's me. I am Peter, being more loving, being more kind, more gentle, more appearing to be more conscious or something. No, but doing it from the perspective of consciousness itself, awareness itself, for the sake of something higher. And this comes back to this idea of giving oneself to God, devoting oneself to God, esoterically meaning the centers devoting themselves to existing for awareness, for the sake of awareness, continuing to realize itself and keep itself in focus, in its seat. And understanding too, it is possible for our mind and for our heart to understand this. The highest part of them can understand life isn't really of any value without that. The rest of it's tomfoolery. The rest of it's nonsense, meaningless, endless endeavor. And so there's a part of us that can serve. We're really serving the highest in ourselves, in our being, by doing these kind of things.
What we've been talking so far, it's actually pretty esoteric and higher level. And if I eat Cheetos and I eat all of this toxic, highly unnatural food, and I eat a lot of processed stuff, and I watch all the time kind of meaningless bullshit. Yeah, so there's actually, and I'm have been doing a lot of substances and all this stuff that it'll have an impact, that will have a big impact. One cannot really, I mean, I'm open to debate, but if my body is, what I put in the body creates certain tendencies, and they don't have it in the fourth way, but there is this rajas, tamas, and sattva, like active, fiery, lethargic, and healthy, vivifying, balanced. To do this kind of work that we are talking about, it's important to the body to be more aligned, to have this more like healthy, vivifying, balanced energies. If I stay late in the night watching movies that don't matter, and I'm eating a lot in bed, and I'm staying on the phone, and I'm eating bad food, this is not going to go very well. First of all, there's no energy for this kind of subtle. And I know that a lot of people listening to this, they have very unhealthy habits, and their food and their diet and lack of exercise, it's really unhealthy. And it's important to bring awareness to it. So if you're really interested in awakening and God and all of that, you need to have some basic commonsensical
purification,
healthy management of the body. In terms of exercise, it doesn't have to be a lot. It depends on the type of the person, but exercise, food, and sleep, because that's a huge denying force. And we are not going to have much energy available for these noble pursuits if my energy is bogged down in this impurity, toxicity. Yeah.
This is a large area. It's not one we've spoken about much, and it's related to the instinctive center in the fourth way. How much this instinctive center in us, behind the scenes, really is governing and taking up space in our life and making decisions for us. And these areas you've mentioned, food, drink, substances, TV, indulgences, things like this, and then not wanting to and avoiding exercise and not eating right. Wanting those potato chips, wanting to watch that movie, that whatever that is, or this is a big area. And it's important too to not be so hard on ourselves if we do indulge in these things. It just depends really too. It's an individual thing. There's no formula, no solution for everyone to do the same, to follow the same diet, or to avoid the same things. But it's a big area, and it's worth investigation. And I can, from my experience, it never goes away. You never become a perfect person or a pure person. I mentioned potato chips. I happen to I really like potato chips. I know they're not good for me, and I try not to eat them. And periodically, I go right to the counter and I buy a little bag of potato chips, and I eat it with great relish. And watching this instinctive center sort of take its little claim on potato chip world. And I usually don't feel well an hour later, especially if I eat too many. But that's just a small example.
Yeah.
And then, so this is a whole nother topic. And there's a lot of pressure on us in life as human beings to begin with. And our instinctive center will be the first relief valve that seeks to let some of this pressure out, or to pacify the tension. And when it comes to this inner work, we have to understand too, this adds pressure. This is a different kind of pressure. This is actually, we're putting pressure on us. We're turning up the heat in ourselves internally by virtue of trying to return to the source. We're taking all this energy away from the body, away from the mind, away from the the identity, the personality. We're extracting now awareness from them, and that creates pressure, that creates tension. This is another reason why this idea when Christ said, "My burden is light," you can take that in different ways. It also means that there's pressure. Pressure gets turned up, the heat gets turned up when you try to move more and more in the direction of awareness. And the instinctive center in particular reacts to this. And that's why, in fact, in some instances, it's actually helpful to give it. We used to call it feeding the wolf. Give it a bag of potato chips. Give it a little something. Just don't give it, give it a bowl of ice cream. Just don't give it a gallon of ice cream.
Yeah, we are not about being ascetic and perfect.
No.
But it, and
no,
you
because
said,
yes, those.
You said there's no recipe, but there are some common thing. I mean,
yes, common sense. Yes,
actual real food. Have real food rather than artificial chemical food. Don't eat too much. Don't eat too late. It's a basic stuff. If possible, some natural organic food, which is tricky because that's expensive. Yeah.
Also, we've been talking lately about the whole idea of the fourth way takes place in the ordinary conditions of daily life. We're not in a monastery where we can't go to the coffee shop at midnight and get a piece of pie, or we can't go out to the liquor store. The food is not, we're not under these limited conditions. We're completely out in the world, in ordinary life, and we have to find a way to navigate this internally. This is not small potatoes. This is not an easy thing. This is what's called inner work, self-mastery, self-realization, learning to serve the highest in ourselves, while also understanding we have a body, we have an instinctive center, we have emotional. Our emotions have a full range. Something in us likes sentimentality and superficiality, and something in us likes violence, the idea of revenge. Watching movies where justice is being sought and won, and the enemy's being destroyed. And this is deep in our human nature, as the kind of that bestial side, the animal side of our human nature. And this idea of sort of becoming an angelic person, from all evidence I see in myself and have seen in people, that's just an idea.
I mean, so if this purification were to be successfully accomplished, what would be the goodies? Do you have any thoughts on that? Why? What then what? What's the end result?
The end result is then that awareness is free to transform itself through more and more conscious self-realization. It's not bound, it's not attached, it's not lured. It's not being drawn out of itself and held prisoner in many ways outside of itself in all these forms. It's freer to return to itself, to know itself. It's sort of like a hose and all the water's just going out of the hose. Now imagine the water just going back into the hose.
I see.
And to me, this is what transformation really is. That consciousness can now actually, can become a, this may sound crude, it can become a metaphysical vacuum cleaner. It can consume everything and transform it by virtue of being conscious of it. And usually it's being drawn out of itself and sort of trampled and corrupted and poisoned and tainted and dispersed. And it can, all of that can turn around. And everything can be returned to its source. And it's strange, but even when you look at something consciously, you are you're in some way drawing it back to awareness, back to what it derived from, what it came from, what it manifested from. And so I see purification as this step, this stage, this process that makes possible the next step process of transformation, of transmutation, which we don't understand. We think about this from the point of view of the mind. This is not the mind that does this. You can't do this by thinking about things a certain way, but and this ultimately too is really about the transformation of suffering. I know it does sound crude, but imagine if when you suffered, instead of it pulling you out of yourself consciously, and you dwelling on it and over-dwelling on yourself, feeling sorry for yourself, all these things, imagine if you could vacuum it up into your own being. And by virtue of that consciousness become more aware, more expansive, more all-embracing. And the vision just came to me of, let's call it God, manifesting the entire universe, right, into all of these forms, heavier and heavier, denser and denser, more and more multifaceted forms, like breath, like breathing out, and then vacuuming them back in, inhaling them, literally inhaling them. Maybe that's a better word, a metaphysical inhaler. The consciousness can be that. It has that capacity. Consciousness is not simply about being present. There's much more to it than that. It's not, presence is an aspect of this conscious awareness. It's an aspect. There's many more aspects to it that we don't understand, but that it can know about itself. And this whole idea of transformation, transmutation, metamorphosis, all of that just hints at what is possible, really. And purification is a necessary predecessor, a gateway. Yes, a doorway opening into that possibility.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I can see there's a purification, and then there's a transmute. There's something more in this model that we use. I found a quote. It just, I heard it, and then it stayed with me and activates itself, and somehow I feel like that would be some of the end result of purification and transmutation, or anything to do with the deep fruits of a spiritual path. Pleasurable oneness with all of life. Pleasurable oneness with all of life. I feel like that's what it is supposed to bring. Now, this doesn't mean that it's pleasure all the time. Not at all. There can be shortage of money, there can be war, there can be unpleasantness, sickness, and all of that. However, through the fulfillment of the seed to become a tree, there would be this pleasurable oneness with all reality. Even if there could be a sickness or can be problems, it's a feeling, sense, being one with it, and is good.
And to me, this is talking about consciousness.
Yeah.
Consciousness sees that way, but the mind does not, the body does not. It doesn't mean that we as this person, that we will, the same idea of true peace, contentment, bliss, all of this all refers to consciousness. This is not, it doesn't mean your body will feel good. It doesn't mean you'll be pain-free. It doesn't mean you'll be debt-free. It doesn't mean you'll be emotionally free. This is this other dimension of realization where there's more and more unity and perception of oneness and bliss and all of that. This is us. This is the mind giving words, trying to put words to what consciousness itself, for lack of a better word, experiences. But then what happens is we imagine that means we as a person, our life's going to become just completely content, no problems, no issues, no pressure, no tension, and it's not true. This dimension of being the human being remains. But there's this other dimension that realizes these things and sees that way. And of course it has an effect on the body and the mind. For example, when you start to see how much your life is really happening to you, it's as though you're just watching it. Consciousness is watching your life unfold, really. Even though your mind is concocting ideas of what to do, and I'll do this and I'll pursue that and I'll boom. That's all actually happening. And consciousness is just seeing it. And the more this sort of saturates your mind, then when you start to, let's say, worry about the future, it's easier to dismiss that worry. Because you see, that's just the mind, again, latching onto something and, say, starting to worry about it. And so it's much easier to let it go because something else has saturated you. This understanding, your life's just happening to you. And so
ultimate safety, I think that deep realization, there is a sense of ultimate safety of consciousness.
Yes, it's really I was thinking about this today, actually, that awareness, this source of awareness actually never manifests itself in this dimension. It does sort of, somehow it affects this dimension. It's like impulses or something, affect the body and affect the mind, affect us as a person. You could say it manifests through the body and through the mind to some extent. At the same time, at the source, it never manifests itself in this dimension. It remains unmanifested. And this is where that peace, that bliss, that, what did you call it? Oneness?
Pleasurable oneness with all of
pleasurable oneness with all. Yes. And that's where the surety can come from, and the trust that all is well, even though things may not be going so well. All is really well. All, meaning all, the oneness is perfectly fine. As David Hawkins said, everything's going from perfect to perfect.
Moment to moment.
Yes, it's perfectly the way it is, as it was meant to be. Now the rose is perfectly in bloom. Now the rose is perfectly dying.
All right, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mihai. And I will add too that it has occurred to me, I'm well aware not many people watch these videos. But it has occurred to me that, do you know, this internet thing and YouTube and these videos may be around for longer than we know.
Yeah.
And someone may be listening to this in 20 or 30 or 50 years. This one sentence said in all these hours we've been talking may resonate and arouse the awareness to a deeper level in someone. And that's a beautiful thing.
And this reminds me, I know somehow that, so Ouspensky wrote In Search of the Miraculous, and it was published after he died. And in these last few years, from various reports, it seemed like Ouspensky was a little bit with a heavy heart, that somehow he felt like he didn't do enough, he didn't succeed to bring this work to the world, he didn't succeed, he was somehow feeling bad about it, and like as if he didn't fulfill something, and then, but he did. I mean, we are talking about this because of that book that was written a long time before we were born, and it was just a longer span, as you are saying, So when I read some book about him, and where I somebody who was with him kind of shared that, and I was so touched, and I was like, oh man, Peter, it's like, you did it amazing. It's like, oh my God.
Yes. Thank you,
Yeah.
Mr. Ouspensky. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for everything. Thank you, Mr. Gurdjieff. Wow.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Mihai.
Thank you, Peter.
Good night.